What's something you learned in school that you've never used once in real life? Story 1. Any maths beyond addition, subtraction, division, and that other one? Excel formulas plus the 4 operations above has been enough for my digital marketing and analytics career. Head of a team earning decent money. Never used trigonometry, algebra, calcium, or those funny Z-shaped things. Story 2, I had French, but I never use it. Was also really bad at. I begged my school to let me do something else because I was not interested to do anything involving French, and dyslexic kids were able to choose to skip French and take informatica, some sort of computer class. They never allowed me because I wasn't dyslexic. Story 3, mothering algebra. I'm not saying all math is bad or whatever, but why make us learn something that most of us will never use again for the rest of our lives? It's not like most of us are going to be rocket scientists or WUV or the hell it's used for. Sure, I'll use basic math stuff like when something's on sale for 10% off. I want to know how much it'll cost after the discount. Say it's $30, 10% off sale. $30 x 0.1 equals sign 3, so the item is $3 off, making it $27. That's pretty basic, and I actually use it. But why would I need to know what something like 3x, 7b, 4 plus 10 days is? I mean, I can do it, but I don't see what the point is of making me learn it. Story 4. I have a technical degree, so I studied lots of math, physics, chemistry, electives supporting that, etc. There's plenty I never used, and I've probably completely forgotten stuff that I learned which would qualify as never used, but I can't even name them LOL. However, the point of learning these things isn't so much the facts themselves, but the process of critical thinking, idea development, divide and conquer problems, prioritization, quickly dismissing unsound concepts, idea organization, communication, clarifying objectives, etc. One of the most important lessons was that it's usually the simplest explanation that is correct. I learned facts that I may have forgotten, but I apply the skills developed to obtain those facts every day. Story 5. Really expensive scientific calculator family couldn't afford, but parents struggled to get it for me, got an A. Seemed easy to me. Next semester was canceled for lack of other people interest, still in storage somewhere. Yes, the blue one. Yes, I was driven, mathematically great and interested, but public school couldn't hire a teacher for just me and one other student. I feel life-changing for me. What do you think about this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Story 6. Honestly, anything after 4th grade. 1-4 it was fundamental on how to do basic math, to high-level vocabulary, and basic logic understanding and knowledge about the world. Grade 5, 12 is repeating everything with just a slight advanced crap in order to filter each person into a category for their eventual career pathways. Only issue is, by the time people graduate, they have way too much crap stuffed in their heads of useless information. They struggle to continue learning and studying come college and later. There has to be a better way of transferring knowledge and not overbearing it and dragging it out. We should learn human skills, human interaction, taxes, home improvement, car maintenance with basic humanity courses and writing, math, science. That way people can get a taste of each potential job market and hopefully find a pathway they like come college onwards. Story 7, calculus. I want to be clear that I am a software engineer, and I was required to take quite literally all of the calculus my university had available, and I mean all of it. It has never come up. Not once. In fact, the only thing that has ever once been relevant that was in those courses is matrix mathematics, which was also taught in a computer science specific course. It's genuinely the only thing I feel incredibly salty about even a decade plus out of college. The biggest waste of time I had to go through, whose skills, even the soft logic skills, were utterly useless. Story 8. Doing a level chemistry and the teacher made us remember something parrot fashion. The spectrum of hydrogen consists of about 5 sets of lines, each of which is a converging series converging on the high energy side. He went around the class making people say it to him. I don't recall him ever explaining it. I didn't understand it then. I didn't understand it when I sat the exam, and I don't think I understand it now. I sat my A-levels in 1992. Story 9. The Krebs cycle. You don't need to know about the Krebs cycle to know that the body's primary source of energy is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and that it makes it from the food you eat and all that happens in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. No one outside of giant bio-nerds gaff about the Krebs cycle. Story 10. A lot of people in here will say things like, "You go to school to learn how to learn. You are clowns, and I detest you. Nobody in the school system is smart enough to teach anyone to think, and condescending platitudes like that make you look dumb." Except Mr. Fisher. He was a god among teachers. Story 11. For primary school, I think there are a lot of things school taught where the ultimate goal was not to use that specific piece of knowledge, teach a concept, introduce something at a simple level, or create a building block. You probably haven't needed to play a recorder since grade school. Plenty of people do go on to play other instruments, though. The recorder teaches a lot about music for only $10 and is much more accessible than something like a trumpet or clarinet. I have never needed to use geometry proofs in my adult life. It can be pretty safely assumed in day-to-day applications that a triangle has 180 degrees because it was proved long ago. The thought process that went into proof is something I use, though. For college, there is a lot of specific stuff that you may use because the degree is trying to cover a variety of different specializations. At the same time, it's still important to teach, though, because you don't know which specific items you're going to need in your career. Also, how would you pick a specialization if you didn't get at least a rough sampler? I've never needed to design an IIR filter or deal with analog design in my career. I work with people who do, though. Story 12 did year-to-year cursive lessons, and my 5th grade teacher took me aside and said he was just going to give me an A and to not bother with taking the tests anymore. I was getting progressively worse at it, demonstrably. We both knew it. I was a straight A+ student in advanced classes, was killing it everywhere else, but my hands were too shaky to perfect this. I was moving at the end of the year. He was retiring at the end of the year. We were both checked out. It wasn't worth trying to get better at it, and he didn't want it to be a random mark on my report card, so he said, let's just call it good. And other than my signature, which I invented for college apps, I don't use it. Story 13. In all honesty, everything's come up at some point or another. I've had conversations where high school knowledge came in relevant. My younger cousins ask me questions about their schoolwork, although I vehemently won't help with trig. Never liked it. I read a lot of random stuff, and the general concepts helped me understand things I read. As an example, transpiration in plants and something I was reading about architecture about keeping spaces cool. English has stayed pretty relevant from an analysis and interpretation point of view. Business concepts come up a lot in conversation and on the news. Yeah, I can't complain. At this point, I more believe that people say things they learned in school weren't useful because they didn't learn how to effectively learn how to use their knowledge base to apply things to new situations. I don't think any knowledge is wasted. Story 14. The problem with this question is that it is so shallow as to be two-dimensional. Every single thing we learn adds to who we are and how our brain works. Did you learn French? We learn to look at words and objects differently. We learn that there isn't a single way to see or understand something in this world. Learn algebra. We learn conceptual thinking as well as abstract. We learn that depending upon the input and the given environment, that each combination can bring the slightest of different results or vastly different results, depending on the components. Learn geography, zoology, biology, or how to do a specific cheer for a football game. Each detail of what is learned is applied across the breadth, width, and most specifically, depth of our understanding of existence around us and how we interact with moving through and being on this planet. Learning gives one experience. Ignorance causes the human mind to fill in the gaps of that ignorance with what it can grasp. This ignorance is the core of our fears because, not knowing if it is a soft little squirrel rattling the bushes or a face-eating leopard, our survival skill is to expect the worst. It is our basic survival skill. So when we are ignorant, we immediately assume, imagine, and go to the worst thing it could be in order to make sure we stay safe. Educating ourselves about a vast myriad of different things allows us to have a better, richer, more varied resource of facts to pull from when we are trying to fill in the gaps of what we do not understand. This is why education is intended to be universal rather than specialized. The broader our learning, the broader our experience, then the broader our understanding of the details of how our world around us works. A monkey can be taught to turn a knob and get a treat. People who understand more and more about the fabric of existence and how the world functions around them command their lives rather than simply be a knob turner for treats. Story 15, Metal Shop. The furnaces scared me to death as a young teen, and I never used any of the basic forging skills taught there again. Second would be wood shop. I wasn't particularly talented in that either, and have gotten along okay as a homeowner, without ever needing to use a buzzsaw. Another terrifying instrument. Buzz, oops, there goes your hand. Story 16. In the mid-'80s, I took the first basic programming class at our school because I was sure that in order to be a proficient computer person going forward, I would have to understand programming. Kinda barely got through it. Never did it or needed it after. Didn't go into career field that was close to IT. Basic wasn't used that long, and honestly, it was still a couple years before computers were that dominant for schoolwork. I still remember the concept of a flowchart and the whole if-then process. Story 17, where they were trying to teach me about Shakespeare. They sure went on about it. I read Hamlet in both English and French in high school, and then again in first-year university. If you had my education, you would think Western culture only had like 3 books. But as far as I know, I have not used Webier. I was supposed to learn from that. I'm also a published fiction and nonfiction writer. Story 18. Math proofs are the only thing that come to mind. Also the law of coziness. I've used most of the other math though, including the calc and trig. Generally, everything from school had value, though some was far more valuable than others. I have some strong opinions on how they do English classes wrong, but I can't say never used once in real life. I just think giving barely literate kids crazy like Beowulf and the Canterbury Tales and then talking about it for weeks is dumb AF. Their syllabus is 100% designed to impress parents, not to teach kids. Story 19. For statistics, I learned how to operate the calculator for permutations and combinations. I've never used those buttons again, and now I don't even have that calculator. Let's gamble! That's funny because in statistics we learned that the house always has an advantage, and since they have way more money than me, even if the odds were even, I would still lose. The joke is I forgot that, so now I want to gamble. Also, isn't it always better when I explain the joke, right? Story 20. I've probably used all of it or at least foundations of it. I'm an engineer but in senior management now. Don't do a whole lot of advanced math anymore, but math also teaches critical thinking skills, which I use all the time. English and writing classes are used when I type business cases, proposals, reports, hell just clear and concise, yet detailed emails. If you really learned, it's all used. I did take scuba diving 1 quarter in college. Haven't used that since. Just haven't had the time. Story 21, I'm an engineer, so I use math every day. It irks me when people say, another day where I didn't find a slope of a line. Okay, you didn't, but plenty of other careers did. Or we learned that foundational math to do more advanced math in our career. Should we just only select some 12-year-olds, decide they're going to be engineers, and only teach them how to find the slope of a line? Or should we give everyone the same foundational math skills so they can go into careers they want in the future? Story 22. The FitnessGram trademark pacer test is a multi-stage aerobic capacity test that progressively gets more difficult as it continues. The 20-meter pacer test will begin in 30 seconds. Line up at the start. The running speed starts slowly, but gets faster each minute after you hear this signal. Beep. A single lap should be completed each time you hear this sound. Ding. Remember to run in a straight line and run as long as possible. The second time you fail to complete a lap before the sound, your test is over. The test will begin on the word start. On your mark, get ready, start. Story 23. A lot of the history facts I learned in school either lacked crucial context, were heavily exaggerated, or came from heavily biased sources, making them pretty useless. Seriously, how many people learned that Nero fiddled why Rome burned, only to later find out Nero wasn't in Rome when the fire took place? Story 24. Anything related to calculus. I think of all the years I spent doing calculus, and I've never used it once outside of school. Granted, I know engineers and statisticians use it, but the amount of time we all spend learning it versus the widespread use of it is crazy. It would be way more useful to teach people personal finances, taxes, and life skills than waste the time of 80% of students to learn things that only a small fraction will ever use in any real context. Story 25. Here's the opposite. In high school, they had a typing class with real typewriters. I immediately laughed at the class. I was not going to be a secretary. Why would I ever need this skill? Then for the next 30 years, I spent every working day typing away at a computer, hunting and pecking until sheer practice made me a proficient typer. However, I still need to glance at the keyboard to orient myself every once in a while. Who knew that useless typing class might have made me a more efficient engineer? Story 25. Most math that is not basic math never needed trigonometry like once. Answer. Advanced stats and trig. I've used a lot in the real world, but for the life of me have I ever encountered a single person who has had to use what I learned in Calculus 2 in college. It is so insanely specific and complex, I legitimately cannot understand why millions of students have either failed out of college or switched from science majors because of just how brutal it is. I would wager less than 0.00001% of jobs on the planet require the mathematics learned in Calc 2. Yet me, and millions of students around the world were forced to take that class to graduate. Oh, and before you have to learn that to understand the next step in mathematics, people chime in. No, we didn't. Unless you are going into grad school or an extremely specific mathematics major, college ends with Calc 2 for 99.9% of science majors, and many of them end at Calc 1. 15 years later, and it still chaps my ass. It's a difficult class for the sake of being difficult, and 99.9999% of people forced to take it will never use it once in their lifetimes. Waste of time. Story 26. Maybe a different turn on this. Our history teacher had a section like common knowledge that he would question every lesson. One day, like over 10 years later, we had a random conversation at work, and the question came up what time the 30-year war has been. And my answer was immediately 1618 to 1648. My coworkers looked at me like they just saw a ghost and Googles if it was right. So far, didn't use any of those other history facts I know, but it's fun if you can randomly use them. Story 27. I thought I'd never need how to calculate a triangle in my life. Then I started working in real estate and met a colleague who struggled to turn slightly complicated floor plans into square meters. Made me appreciate that I understood basic geometry. Cherry on top. Colleague was pretty sexist, plus always told me how educated the people in his country are and how good their school system was. Story 28. Most of British history, which starts from the approx Roman period, with a bit of Druid/Celtic/Stonehenging before that, so there's rather a lot to learn in a relative short time, meaning it's just a bunch of half-remembered things like Keynuts shouting at the sea, the Civil Wars, Vikings, smallpox, Great Fire of London, plague, witches, hating France again, a bit of empire, Henry Tudor had some wives, another civil war, heraldry, castles, something about slavery, something about stopping slavery, pirates, and then world wars. Story 29. Trigonometry, molecular structure, spatial geometry, nuclear chemistry, algebraic systems with multiple unknowns, etc. Mind you, those were high school subjects in my school, having picked math science in order to qualify for military academy, where I flunked the physical, being too short. I did 8 years of enlisted service anyway. Story 30. Logarithms. Not only was that month hell, it was clearly obvious that the teacher didn't understand what we were doing either. Then at the end, we just entered the magic formula into the magic device to end up with a seemingly random number. But if that random number isn't the same as everyone else, nothing happens because no one understands what the hell is going on. Story 31. I remember in grade school one of my best buds, and the teacher got into it about diagramming sentences, and at a point the teacher goes, well, if you don't pay attention, you'll be on a one-way street to dropping out or something to that affect. My buddy, who is a very funny dude without skipping a beat, retorted, oh no, so in this worst-case scenario, I'll probably end up working at McDonald's, and I highly doubt I will ever have a customer ask, hey, could I get a diagrammed sentence with my meal? I still remember the teacher's face, a mixture of anger and the realization he was absolutely right. He got sent to the office, but we all clapped for him as he left. Legend. Story 32. What are we learning about dinosaurs for? It's not like we will need that info when being pulled over, sir. Do you know the height of a velociraptor? No? Jail. Gotta take classes now on history and fossils instead of safe driving classes, haha. Answer. Velociraptor is a diminutive dromaeosaurid dinosaur that lived in Asia during the late Cretaceous. Smaller than most other dromaeosaurids, Velociraptor was about 2 m long with a body mass around 18 kilograms. It was a bipedal feathered carnivore with a long tail and an enlarged sickle-shaped claw on each hindfoot, which is thought to have been used to tackle and restrain prey. Velociraptor can be distinguished from other dromaeosaurids by its long and low skull with an upturned snout. Story 33. Other than a few specific trigonometry formulas, law of cosines anyone, it's hard to think of something I haven't at least gained some benefit or appreciation for later things in life. I may have never picked up a basketball since 8th grade, but having learned how to play makes me able to follow and appreciate the game when my much more sports-loving friends have it on. I may never need to speak French, but every once in a while it turns out to at least let me appreciate some random post that crosses my feed that I couldn't otherwise interact with. Literature, history, even wrong history, science, even outdated science. At the very least, things are fodder for meme appreciation, context for new things I run into, or a metric to evaluate how my own knowledge is increasing. But seriously, law of coziness, WTF. Story 34. Other than a few specific trigonometry formulas, law of cosines anyone, it's hard to think of something I haven't at least gained some benefit or appreciation for later things in life. I may have never picked up a basketball since 8th grade, but having learned how to play makes me able to follow and appreciate the game when my much more sports-loving friends have it on. I may never need to speak French, but every once in a while it turns out to at least let me appreciate some random post that crosses my feed that I couldn't otherwise interact with. Literature, history, even wrong history, science, even outdated science. At the very least, things are fodder for meme appreciation, context for new things I run into, or a metric to evaluate how my own knowledge is increasing. But seriously, law of coziness, WTF. What would you do? I'm waiting in the comments. Story 35, most math, simply BC, it doesn't come into play for my day-to-day. Although one could argue the purpose of being taught all the math that we are is to expand our brains and critical thinking capabilities, so perhaps I use it all the time. There's of course other things like memorizing the states and their capitals in alphabetical order. Unless I end up on a game show, I doubt I'll need those files in my mental cabinet ever again. Or the wonderful things I learned in careers. Good grief, that semester was interminable. Story 36. Everything I forgot about learning in the first place. School focuses too much on short-term memorization and regurgitation of facts. In order for many things to be stored in long-term memory, you must have repetitive exposure over a longer period of time. Studying something for a few weeks and then moving into a new topic won't store that information in long-term memory. Story 37. Multiplying matrices, more than one matrix, a series of numbers in brackets. Didn't see the point of learning it at school, and since leaving, I don't think I've ever seen a number matrix in real life, let alone having to multiply two of them together. I assume it has some higher maths usage, but it's purely theoretical, and therefore effectively pointless, as far as I'm concerned. Story 38. Well, I mean things like history I've never really used, but I still consider the knowledge worthwhile. Same with chemistry, never ever used it, but I'm still glad I took it. Probably if anything it would be the higher math classes like trigonometry and calculus. Unless you are in a specialized engineering or scientific field, you are rarely, if ever, going to use those in your daily life. Story 39. Holy hell, this thread is chock full of people who don't understand why you learn something. It's for exposure. You may not become a professional recorder player, but it may expose you, or your classmate, to the joy of playing and even making your own music. Ditto for every other thing you learn. Think of learning as lifting weights. Outside of a gym, I likely will never have to lift a bar off my chest while laying on a bench. But the strength I've built will be useful. The rigors of academic practice are invaluable. Even if the subject matter is inconsequential, those complaining about learning the structure of language, it shows. Writing clearly is sorely in demand, and being able to clearly and logically organize your thoughts in written form is incredibly powerful. Story 40. How to work with stupid people that leave you to do 99% of the project / you are randomly assumed responsibility of because you're a gifted student. If that happens in a work environment, it doesn't slide anymore. It gets brought up to upper management. I'm not sure why teachers always think the quiet, intelligent girls should be paired with the rowdy, inattentive boys, as if it will influence them. All it did was give me anxiety. I was a little girl with undiagnosed ADHD who was told the sensory room was only for little boys who couldn't stop moving, and then the teachers would even pair those little boys with me so I could influence them to behave. I don't know what it's like to live without every waking moment in internalized anxiety in a 5-lane mental track highway, but I was good at keeping it together in public. Always have been from the start. That's your curse as a woman with ADHD and good masking skills. The internal conflict I'm still working through as an adult is tough. Answer. Weird BEQs. It still happens at my job. BEQs, the manager's performance is indicated by team's project completion. So technically, school did prepare me to do most of the work and try not to be bitter. I'm still am. When speaking to their manager, they state, well, everyone has different strength and being a manager is about working with difficult people to get job done. SMH. Answer. I had one professor who would allow people to fire a group project member. There was a multi-step process, similar to a real-life escalation, the group could elect to do if someone had been unable to fulfill their end of things. It would involve emailing the group member. It would involve various other forms of documenting the problem and showing that steps were taken to correct the issue. If all of the steps failed, then the group member would be removed from the group and their failure did not impact the other members. You mention it gets brought to upper management. True, but usually there is a documentation process. You send an email, you document the problem before going to upper management. Answer. I think upper management doesn't really care who gets things done, as long as the team hits the deadline. This is a common misconception. If I get assigned a team that doesn't work with me, I often either prep work they'll do later or do nothing at all. And when they fatigue and don't show up, I just jump in and do their work. To the boss, it looks like I'm doing the work of two people. Story 41. Remember, everyone, sometimes in school, you learn topic A not because you will use it in life, but you needed a skill, logic, reasoning, etc., to learn topic B, which you do need in life. Sometimes you needed topics AE because topic F was too complex for your school-aged brain. And also, you learned these topics because teachers and schools have no clue what you are going to after graduation. I had a buddy who took sewing in high school. I took home economics so I could cook for myself. He took sewing and became a custom car restoration expert, and he needed to sew replacement, customized seats for these old cars. Story 42, French. It's a mandatory part of the Canadian school curriculum, or at least it was when I was in school. After being forced into French class from elementary through middle school and the first year of high school, I speak about 6 words, and 5 of them are swear words. Living in Western Canada, there's no need to know French unless you want to work for the federal government, and no one in their right mind wants to do that. Story 43. No one is going to use everything they learn in school. That isn't really the point. How would you know you wanted to be a chemist if you never took chemistry? How would you know you wanted to be a literature professor if you never took a literature class? Yes, it is in part about teaching people basic skills they can use, algebra, reading. But it is also about exposing students to what is out there. Answer. That's pretty fair, take that I've never heard before. But in that case, such classes should be electives, or at least only require 1 or 2 years. Being forced to read literature and being tested on it under the guise of teaching English seems so absurd to me and felt like such a waste of valuable education time, especially when you are given trash grades for not complying. Answer. That's my take. And I figure if you use 20% of what you learned, you're probably doing pretty good. The problem with cutting out classes is you don't know what someone will need in the future. You're making a general education platform to give as many people the best possible options you can. And maybe my 20% goes to 28%, but now Bob's is down to 7, and that's just sad. And there's probably something to be said for when people use something and don't realize they have. Like, how often do you actually know where you learned something that you remember? Maybe it was online. Maybe it was that grumpy Ms. Sally who rambled a bit too much in your 7th grade classes. Story 44. How to write checks and balance a checkbook. I actually had a checkbook, but the only time I tried to write a check, they wouldn't accept it because the check number was under 500. Anytime I needed a check since then, I just get a cashier check from the bank. You'll still get older generations ranting how kids these days need this skill in school or something. I'm well into adulthood. I think the last time I had to use a physical check was 6 years ago. And checkbook? We have this thing called online banking now. I don't need to keep a running tally until I get my monthly statement in the mail. I just glance at my phone and say, okay, I'm down that much, it'll update in a couple days. Story 45. A lot of the fine minutiae of writing, like object prepositions, descriptive verbs, who versus whom, etc. Like, I can write perfectly fine, but I have lost all concept of what these terms mean, where they're applicable, and how to use them. Luckily, I've entered a career in which that knowledge is not useful. I'm a professional writer. Answer. When I was struggling badly to learn French, I discovered that part of the problem was that I didn't understand English well enough, at least not the atoms of the language such as the past present participle, or all the verb forms and what they're called, or the differences between adjectives and so on. I believe that I write well enough in English, but I suspect so much of it is innate or built up over time or ingrained so that even if I can't quote what rule is being used, I am able to use them, if that makes sense at all. Answer. The study of literature is doubly blessed with clear rules and indefinite artistry. As a rules-based system, grammar can click for a cohort of students. Auditing to that skill set is useful for the kids who learn best with a clear system of rules. Meanwhile, other students can bury themselves in books and learn how to express themselves by emulating their favorite authors. It's hard to imagine another subject where young students can go so far by themselves. Offhand, physical training requires immense personal discipline, though a student is usually best served with a trainer watching them train correctly. Story 46. It isn't as much about what you learn, but learning how to learn. Look around. Media literacy is at an all-time low. People never learned how to learn things and just accept anything a news channel shows them without question. Answer. And before anybody gets all high and mighty here and thinks only Fox News conservatives do this, it is 100% a thing with Redditors as well. Every popular topic here gets brigaded and clickbaited to death by people with massive Dunner-Kruger syndrome. Just knowing a little bit, likely from something they read on Reddit, gives them the utmost confidence to speak as an authority figure. When you spend decades in an industry or otherwise are an objective expert on something, you realize how so many people are full of when a thread on a dry topic like automation, my expertise, is full of nonstop misinformation, and you're the most downvoted person trying to keep things nuanced. Not enough people talk about how the literacy rate in the U.S. started falling off a cliff as the first kids who spent most or the entirety of their time in school under Common Core. As someone who was in the last class of people who didn't have to abide by Common Core standards, I got to have an up-close look of how bad that system is by getting tickled by it in a couple mixed grade classes I had. They turned into multiple choice packet classes that required absolutely nothing in the way of learning or teaching. They gave you the who, what, when, where, but the parts that actually mattered, the ones that required research and doing actual work to get the why and the how, were completely ignored because at that point they didn't care if you learned the details, they cared that you retained the answers. Story 47. Algebra. I did use trigonometry in the Navy, having to plot ballistic solutions and fire control problems on paper, but in actual practice, our computers did it for us. We still had to plot it out on paper to understand the functions involved. Answer. That's kind of weird. I do fire control for Arty. Mostly we just use computers too, but when doing manual calculations for safety, the Army has distilled it all down to algebra based on numbers pulled from firing tables. Those firing tables required a lot of trig to make, but the DoD just used computers to make them. Anyway, I always imagined the Navy just relied on range to target to pull a quadrant elevation out of a firing table and then maybe applied a drift correction to the direction the gun is shooting. With both gun and target moving, that's just the easiest solution I could come up with for getting around on target. I don't know if the Navy has any FMs for old fire control techniques, but I would actually mind digging through one. Just the rolling around in the waves adds a whole new element to the problem of gunnery. Story 48. Math post-algebra. Anything really science-related. Like geography, I know, but I don't know how much I use it day to day. Answer. You're limiting the concept of use. Anything that contributes to you understanding something else is a use. So is getting a joke or understanding some meme that crosses your feed. Not to mention inoculation against bad information. If you know enough to roll your eyes at anti-vax flat earthers, thank your old science teacher. You may not remember or care much of the specifics of plate tectonics or the water cycle, but you got the important stuff. Story 49. Football, rugby, basketball, etc. Haven't played or analytically watched any of these sports since stopped doing PE in school. I don't know what the offside rule is. I don't know why league and union are different. No idea about basketball. I will never truly know, and it likely not cause any hindrance to my life whatsoever. My knowledge starts and ends with team must get ball to other end and get it past the goal mouth line basket rim to score points. Story 50 Pythagorean theorem, or WVR it's called. In fact, my white-collar job does not require me to use more than basic math. That said, I encourage all students to get a solid math foundation in high school because it opens up so many more career options. Try becoming a doctor without taking advanced science classes that require physics, etc. Answer. I was planning out a garden and wanted to know if staggering the rows would allow me to get more tomatoes in while maintaining the distance between them. It turns out finding the answer required the Pythagorean theorem. I cursed my math teacher. Then a few years later, I found myself working alongside some archaeologists. They used the Pythagorean theorem to lay out their test pits and keep them square. Recently, I joined the board of a historic cemetery. There is a headstone from the early 1800s with a lot of Masonic imagery. One symbol was a mystery. It was sort of a Y shape. It turns out it was a representation of the Pythagorean theorem. Apparently, it holds some symbolic value in Freemasonry. After 30 years of never using the damn thing, I have found 3 occasions in the last 5 years where knowing it had some actual value. Story 51, the recorder. Answer. Last week I pulled up to a stoplight on a busy commercial road and there was this guy standing there waiting for his bus. Older guy in jeans and a flannel shirt with a rather large backpack, and he was playing a recorder. It was black with a white mouthpiece. He wasn't going nuts on it, but his fingers were moving, so it sure looked like he was playing it. I watched him for a good minute, trying to formulate his backstory in my head. Seeing a man out and about playing the recorder, it was ominous. It felt off, like this was a man operating well outside the bounds of society, a man capable of doing anything. I was happy when the light turned green and I was able to put distance between us. Answer. The recorder gets a lot of, and as an elementary school music teacher, I understand why, and I also know you are saying this as a joke that doesn't warrant this technical response, but the reason we teach the recorder is not to play the recorder. Third graders are at an age where their fine motor skills should be making a significant jump, as well as their lung capacity. Playing the recorder helps with that development at the right age, without putting something that may be too big, such as a clarinet or a saxophone, in their hands. So all that is said to say, we use the stuff we learn from recorder significantly more than we think. We just don't use the stuff we learned to play recorder. Story 52. Took 6 years of French but never met any French people who couldn't speak better English than my French. This was my experience with German. I still practice and maintain my French and German knowledge on a daily basis, but the one time I went on exchange back in HS, my host family was so excited to practice their English that I didn't get much of a chance to use my German, which frankly may have been for the best because I was already massively anxious the entire time. Answer. I studied French in high school and college and worked really hard at getting good once and for all over the quarantine. However, the past couple of summers I have gone to Italy to study art and had to learn Italian. I suck at Italian. I'm not amazing at French, but a lot of it is very familiar. Anyway, the first day I arrived in Italy was checking into my hotel, and the guy carrying up my luggage asked me something in Italian while we were waiting in the elevator. I didn't understand him and assumed it was my crappy Italian. Actually, he wasn't Italian and was speaking with a heavy accent. We chatted in English for a minute, but then he said he spent a lot of time in France and was pretty fluent in French. Ah, a familiar language. So we chatted in French the rest of the way to my room. Like I said, I'm not great at French, but it was nice to hear a familiar foreign language, and I understood it better than Italian. I was at the hotel for a few days, and every time he saw me, he said, "Bonne journée." Also, once I ran into some French people who were at my college for some reason during finals week, so no one was around. I chatted to them in very broken French, ha ha ha, but they patiently spoke slowly and clearly so I could understand them and respond. They seemed really pleased I knew some French. I hope you run into some nice French speakers one of these days and have an opportunity to chat in French. Answer. I took 4 years of Japanese. So far it got me into university despite having only grade 11 math. Applied, not pure. And then one time, years and years later, some Japanese people were visiting my church. I was doing some other thing there, but when they were headed out the door, I called, "Good night," out to them. My pronunciation was always pretty good as a student, and they all appeared surprised. That's it, university. And one phrase spoken to some Japanese visitors.